Okay, so I think we are ready to start. Welcome, everyone. My name is Agnieszka Król, and I work here at the Jagiellonian University. And with my colleague Natalia Pamuła for the University of Warsaw, we will be moderating today's panel discussion. And first of all, we want to express our gratitude to the organizers for putting this event together. And secondly, we also want to express that we are really extremely honored to have this privilege of opening this conference, and would like to thank the organizers for inviting us to put this panel together. To open the conference, we wanted to quote Maria Reimann, disability researcher and anthropologist with low vision, who passed away last year. In her book, I Won't Greet You on the Street, Drafts on Experiencing Disability, in the context of attempting to understand disability different than her own, but also in the context of looking at the sky to search for astronomical phenomena, she said, "Seeing the Andromeda carries less importance than the very act of searching for it." And we wanted to open this conference with this quote.
Right, and we entitled the conversation we are about to have Imagined Futures and Politics of Disability Studies in Central Eastern Europe, and would like to say a few words about it and explain where it comes from. So although, well, we are in an academic setting, I think all of us are really aware that disability studies is indebted to disabled activists. In other words, more than an academic discipline, it is also a mode of engaging with the world, motivated by a desire to transform it. And in many ways, this desire this situation produces a question about our accountability or accountability of academia scholars, particularly those without disabilities, to the disabled community. At the same time, this history of disabled activists fighting for a more accessible and just world, which ends up in the late 1970s and early 1980s, it ends up paving a way toward an academic discipline. This is a very much a Western or Anglophone history. It seems to us that the history of Eastern European disability studies has a different trajectory and has not been necessarily aligned with the emergence of the disability rights movement in the region, or it might have a different relationship to the movement. And so we bring this up right now because in order to imagine a future of disability studies in this part of the world, I think we need to recover its probably quite messy histories.
And with this conversation, we would also like to critically unpack the present practices and focus within disability studies in Central and Eastern Europe. And this includes discussing continuous, but also contentious relations between the academia, public policies, and the social justice movements. On one hand, we can observe major discursive shifts in relation to understanding disability, both within public policies, including, but also not limited to the implementation of the UN CRPD, but also within the cultural imaginaries that redefine disability community, that redefine how we define disability, and key concepts such as care, interdependency, or disabled futures. On the other hand, we still witness certain stagnations when it comes to various crucial indicators, including critical stagnation in labor market, despite all the investments in inclusion, certain stagnations in the institutionalization processes, socioeconomic status, and poverty. But also the deeply rooted ableist norms that are prone to change, for example, in relation to reproductive rights of persons with disabilities. We also observe newer and emerging cross-movement and interdisciplinary conversations in our regions with the influence of feminist, queer, trans, and critical race studies methodologies. Globally, there are more and more studies when it comes to relation between disability and climate change, given the disproportionate impact on persons with disabilities. And this also raises questions on the relationship between Central Eastern European disability studies and other regions that often are more impacted, often with their colonial pasts. And it also opens this reflection about our rarely questioned reliance on Western research and epistemologies. And it's this connection from the knowledge that is produced in the region, but also rooted in post-colonial contexts. Moreover, while studying war veterans have been central to our discipline, we are now again facing consequence of militarization, war, conflict and displacement within our region, with the Russian invasion in Ukraine, but also in the contexts that are that have less geographical proximity, like Palestine, Syria, or Sudan, to name a few. But still, disability studies perspective remains valid, given its focus on producing disability on all of the sides of the conflict.
Well, perhaps this is slightly unexpected, but we would like to acknowledge that right now there is genocide going on in Palestine. And we decided to mention this because disability studies is a field driven by an ethos of engagement. And it seems to us that it would be extremely difficult to silence this. And we also bring this up because we want to reflect upon the role of Eastern European disability studies in the face of this particular ongoing genocide, and ask how we might use the disability studies toolkit to understand what is going on. It is important to emphasize that while thousands of people are dying every day, even more are becoming disabled. And so to conclude these introductory remarks, we want to pose a series of questions. Some of them will be addressed by our panelists that we will introduce in a second. Some will be taken up during the conference, and probably most of us engage with them in our scholarly work. So what are really the stakes of Eastern European disability studies? I mean, this is area studies in the end, right? So why do we need, in a world which is increasingly globalized, the regional study of disability? And what does it even mean? And what does it do to the global theory of disability? How does it push the global theory of disability? And how do we practice and understand intersectionality? And what is the place of queer, crip, feminist, and anti-racist disability politics within Eastern European disability studies? And so, having said that, we would like to introduce our panelists. Each of them will speak for around 5 minutes, addressing the main questions and issues. And I have a privilege of introducing Magda Szarota, over there, who's a photographer, poet, senior research associate at Lancaster University in the United Kingdom. She's an award-winning cross-sectional strategist and human rights advocate. And in 2019, she was honored with the title of Ambassador for the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And next to Magda is Kateřina Kolářová, who teaches at the Faculty of Humanities at Charles University in Prague. She has explored social and cultural imaginaries of otherness and social attitudes towards disability, mechanisms of exclusion, feminism, and queer identities, especially in the context of Eastern Europe. And her forthcoming monograph is entitled Rehabilitative Post-Socialism, and it is forthcoming with Michigan University Press in 2025, and we can't wait to read it.
We also welcome Professor Darja Zaviršek, sociologist, professor of social work at University of Ljubljana. She's also a member of the Slovenian Academy of Science and Art. And since the beginning of the network of academic network of European disability expert, she's a member of the network. She has been also key to establish disability studies in Slovenia. And we welcome also Kamila Albin, who is a PhD candidate in the Institute of Applied Social Sciences, University of Warsaw, a sociologist by training, and her research interests evolve around disability studies. Her dissertation is devoted to self-advocacy and activism of women with disabilities in biographical perspective. And we're going to start this panel with Kamila Albin. So the floor is yours, Kamila, and I will hold your mic.
Okay. My first encounter with disability studies was through social model of disability. Even though now I know that it has its limitations and it's strongly criticized by researchers with disabilities, Still, I feel its liberating influence on my own. I'm grateful that disabling influence of society was acknowledged, and disability studies has shown me that we can move beyond understanding disability in medical terms or as tragedy or suffering. Terms like ableism, inspiration porn gave me a frame to describe such phenomena as, for example, microaggressions towards persons with disabilities. I knew that they existed, but I didn't have a name for them. However, I felt it on my own also. Sometimes I hear from researchers without disability that disability studies is a kind of a straight jacket put on researchers, and I think that it's. I don't think so, but I think that disability studies obliged us to certain things. For example, to be more aware of the language we use, to be aware of accessibility for our research to different groups, and to our research to be useful for community of persons with disabilities. After 6 years of being in the academia, I have reflection that our disability studies is plagued by the same diseases as whole society. I mean ableism, strong individualism, and competition. And I could add to that things, loneliness in research process. Unfortunately, I have impression that academic researcher is valued on the basis of productivity and efficiency. From the beginning to the end of our research project, we have to be very good managers, administrators, researchers, and authors of highly cited research articles. You can ask, why do I mention the academia at large? Because disability studies is a part of it, and in my opinion, it's very difficult to separate them or impossible. Even though accessibility of academia is better than ever, particularly in aspect of adaptation of studying process for students and PhD candidates, for example, adaptation of materials or lectures, still it is very poor for researchers with disabilities. For example, as researchers, we don't have separate budgets for assistance in our research. Conducting my own research with women activists with disabilities, I observe that still the success of our academia career continues to depend more on having our own support network, such as closest family, than on systemic support. So, how utopian disability studies could look like? I imagine that it could be more collaborative, inclusive, more sensitive to mental health issues, more caring and supportive. Maybe we should publish more in our national languages and in ways that are more accessible for the entire community of people with disabilities. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Kamila, for your intervention. And now we'd like to give the floor to Professor Darja Zaviršek. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm amazed that so many researchers do disability studies in Poland, and I would love to be finally the member of the wonderful network. I hope you will accept me. So Agnieszka and Natalia already mentioned the direct or indirectly the militarization of everyday life and the reconfiguration that is in the title of this conference. Unfortunately, we have to say, we have to reconfigure disability studies into emphasizing more what is happening with people with disabilities during the war or armed conflicts, during wars, and in their aftermaths. And in these few minutes, I just want to offer some suggestions on what needs to be considered within disability studies concern armed political conflict situation and the rights of persons with disabilities. And I will draw and I somehow base this short summary on my analysis on what is going on in Ukraine, and which is also part of my research work that will come out in a couple of months in the special issue of Human Rights and Social Work Journal and in the book Social Work and Armed Political Conflict. So my point one is that emergency and exceptional situations, such for example as war, deepen and reinforce social inequalities. For example, a professor of social work recalled the first months of Russian invasion on Ukraine. I quote, she said, the state protected families, but it has forgotten the disabled people and older people. Raisa Kravchenko, very well-known president of all Ukrainian NGO Coalition for Persons with Intellectual Disabilities, reported that the main concerns in the last 2 years for persons with disabilities and their families were, and close peoples and caregivers, were the termination of social services at the municipal level due to security risks, the barriers related to transportation to services, as public transportation was unavailable due to airstrikes, the cancellation of state financial support for day services run by NGOs, and also a significant decrease in NGO services across the country. Obviously, the social inequalities deepened. Point two is that in disability studies, we need to raise awareness and address and document what is going on the ground regard of people with disabilities during wartime. And very briefly, in such situation, many people with physical and sensory disabilities are less able than others to escape danger. They face incomprehensible warnings. Shelters, as we know, are inaccessible. Caregivers were lost. Families are inaccessible, especially for children who were dismissed from institutions. Almost 50,000 children were dismissed from one day to another from different institutions across Ukraine. Heat, light, food, and water unpredictable, noise unbearable, routines and structures disrupted. Very many people with disabilities who are old often do not have the right to self-determination if they want to stay in their homes and refuse to leave despite the risk. Point three, people with disabilities who are incarcerated in large institutions during peacetime are often forgotten, but they can be even more forgotten and invisible during wartime. And So, not to mention, many of you know that when we speak about incarceration in Ukraine, most of the people live in psychoneurological internats, the internats, and like over 44,000 people, and the harmful and disabling conditions there are getting even more unbearable during wartime. So we can think about people from eastern Ukraine who had to move to the west in overcrowded places, or they face danger to be deported, and there are still over 10,000 people who stay in the internats in eastern part of Ukraine. We can think about children who were forcibly basically dismissed because of the lack of carers, people who worked in institutions simply very often disappeared. And some of the people were sent to Western Ukraine without medical documentation, even without medical equipments. Some of them were deported to remote areas of Russian Federation, and it's not possible to because of the lack of the staff, that people would be sent or supported to go to the shelters. So we can just imagine also the level of mental health deterioration. In March 2023, there were reports that say that people are hiding for months in shelters, including children, and parents are so traumatized that they don't allow their children to go out on the ground from the shelters, which we can imagine what does it mean for the children. Point 4, it's important to collect disaggregated data regarding people with disabilities to increase their visibility, for example, where they live, what is happening in institutions, how many are internally or externally displaced. Point 5, understanding the historical legacy within disability studies can help to predict the future of the disability rights model in the country, and also advocating for structural change. Here I think that, I hope, I can imagine that the old-fashioned Soviet-style tradition will be unfavorable for Ukraine by the end of the war, and so I hope this will push for deinstitutionalization. Point 6, disability studies in its critical tradition recognize that in war and other emergencies, persons with disabilities are not only the recipients of care, the needy, but also those who are agents, who use their practice wisdom to navigate other services. For example, Sarah Webby made a wonderful research showing that after the in Lebanese war, after Israeli attack 2006, the Lebanese organizations of persons with disabilities show that these organizations were those who helped other organizations to with the knowledge, with the practice wisdom around. And just the final point is that within the disability studies, the research has to focus not only at what has to be done and the disasters things, but also on heroism, collectivity, and solidarity. And we also have from Ukraine examples of solidarity and creating communities that need to be documented and learned from in regard of disability and rights. Thank you very much.
So Hi, good morning. I want to start by echoing the thanks to the conference organizers and the platform of disability studies in Eastern Europe for keeping it going for several years, being so efficient that with the money that they could bring us here and do this conference. And also, I want to thank Natalia, Agnieszka, and my 4 speakers for actually situating this panel in larger global and also local burning political issues. And also, I wanted to thank you for being here so early and honoring us with your attention. It's pretty rough to be here before 9 o'clock in the morning. And I am moved to be here because it is a historic moment that we have this Disability Studies Conference in Eastern Europe, with most people coming from Eastern Europe and located in either in Eastern Europe or locations adjacent, and having the affinity, political and affective, to Eastern Europe, and figuring out what is to do disability studies here with the locality. So I think, like, when Kamila has pointed to the utopian horizon, I feel the CRIP horizon in a way is coming. In the Munozian sense, we'll never reach it. The horizon always have to keep moving and ahead of us and unreachable in a sense. But like looking back, when Darja came to Prague for one of the first disability studies conferences that we organized some more than 10 years ago, there is a critical mass that has grew up in the meantime. The attendance and the topics have changed, and I think we are, so as I said, I moved and excited, and this is a historical moment for us. So let's keep the utopia horizon skipping and moving in front of us and moving us somewhere. And then I have to turn, I don't have a paper, my printer died on me, so I am, just bear with me as I'm trying to read out from my computer. So building on what has been said, I was tasked, or I chose to speak to 2 questions. That is, what we imagine as the new directions and new burning issues for disability studies in the Eastern Europe, and what is the role of CRIP theory in the region. And I want to bring them together. And I do feel that my points will be somewhat banal, but hopefully they will start us. So I believe, and I have previously argued, okay, I will slow down perhaps. How are you doing? I don't see you, so, but, okay, I will try to pace me. I believe, and I have previously argued, that CRIP theory not only allows for questioning and political positioning that go beyond organizations and structures and identity, so organizations and institutions based around identity politics, but also offers the framework for politicizing disability and keeping it, I will borrow from Butler here, critically queer and critically CRIP. Excuse me, I'm also, my brain is not ready for this early moment. So what does it mean to keep disability studies critically CRIP? It might mean many different things, and I believe you would have different answers, but I wanted to highlight that perhaps it would mean to expand the understanding of disability and CRIP politics beyond impairment, expand it beyond identity and processes of identification, and keep it relational, contextual, and historicized, if you will, anti-categorical. So in a sense, for me, CRIP theory allows us to push against the category of disability, or keep it always open, always expanding, and situated in relations and political relations. And that perhaps, as I said, we are in a historical moment. Clearly, disability studies in Eastern Europe is growing. We are building movement. We are building discipline. And I think this is a complicated moment that holds us captive in a sense. We are, as I said, building a field is very powerful, it's empowering, and it's really important. But also it might represent its own dangers, and willingly or not, when we are establishing the field, we also, what disability means, we delineate its meaning, we keep it in the discipline, we discipline it. We discipline what neurodivergence means, what neuroqueer means, because we need to talk about it, we need to study it, we need to relate to it in the context. So I think when we do disability studies, as we do crip theory, we also need to simultaneously undo it, keep it open, push against it, not get too comfortable if you wish. And then I would want to bring in Robert McGruer, my close cooperator and friend, who is always saying, when thinking about crip theory, he wants to think it about as a verb. Not as an adjective, not as a noun, but so to accentuate its performative nature as a verb, because as sort of doing things and always keeping in accounting what we are doing when we are doing crip. So, just briefly, when I found crip theory and tried to, and I think very unsuccessfully in some sense, to translate it, to accommodate it in the research in Eastern Europe, I found it very helpful to explore the culturally and historically specific uses and implications of disability, as well as forms of disability-related abandonment, exclusion, and institutions that have not and would not be recognized as part of disability politics or organizing. When I started, HIV was not recognized as a disability issue, but of course it is. Abandonment and chronic and long-term abandonment of racialized communities, being Roma or now more recently immigrant communities, it is a disability issue, even though it is not being recognized as disability issues. So this is where specifically and concretely I thought crip theory will allow us and will help us to undo this sort of disciplining of disability theory and organizing and activism as well. So, but I did not want to talk about it more because I have written it elsewhere and we don't need to waste the time on it or wait for my book. Hopefully, finally, after several years of abandoning it, it's coming out in spring next year. So, and now I want to keep what I said about crip theory sort of here and resonating, and I want to turn to the now. And I think the nows are really complicated. And I think I want to open by sort of a caveat. I think often when we think about now, there is a fallacy, because very often the now is also politicized to bring us to think about crisis as something that is exceptional, rather than, as is often the case, what we consider now is a durational now. It has been going on for some time and it will go for some time. And this sort of a notion of nowness and the acuteness is very easily, especially in the neoliberal politics of austerity and abandonment, it has been used very effectively. So when we talk about now, let's grip it, let's sort of push against what we consider now. And I think that has been apparent from how we started the conversation. So, but I will be dutiful, responding what I consider the now of the now. And I think there is not one answer, and I think we need many responses to the questions. And I think we might need to have arguments and conflicts about, and we have to be not afraid of the complicated conversation of what is the now. And I think these conflicts would allow us to reflect on what we come from, and also what nows we do not see, we do not live, where are our sort of privileges that allow us not to be concerned with those nows. So when talking about now, I think about the chronic now, the durational now, the now that goes beyond now. Sorry for this long caveat. So now, very quickly, I want to situate and position myself to the now that I will present now, because I did not do it when talking about crip theory, so at least here. My thinking about what I consider now of disability studies grows out of a multiple inspiration and multiple complicated co-living. It comes from my committed vermicomposting and passion in gardening, learning to assist to and depend on my neuroqueer dog. And I on purpose start here with non-human lives rather than to talk about our disabled cohabitation with my lover and partner. But I sort of wanted to start with this non-human lives and thinking about what Kasia thank you, Kasia, you are here, talks about as a eco-crip relationality. So I think this is one of the answer to my now, and I want to also talking about war and violent conflict, they are part of the now that is the environmental and ecological distress and disruption. So I think this is where I want to work more, also in related to racialized communities. But I will skip what I had said here, and I want to sort of like, I think what is also important and appeared and sort of deemed on me when listening to our rather grim takes on where we are now. So I think our nows also, and we need to live in those really complicated and fucked up times, sorry for the bad word, but trying to find ways how to live through them, I think also needs us to bring some kink and humor and find how to respond to this ecological distress and crisis in an appropriate ways. Like not try to come to some proper and clean and natural response, but rather live with this compromised, both ecologically and ethically, but also, you know, queerly and cripply, that pushes against these proper responses to the distress. Thank you.
Thank you, first of all, to Magdalena Zdrodowska for initiating the platform, and kudos to her and other organizers of the conference, because I agree with Kateřina, it is a milestone. And thank you, Agnieszka and Natalia, for inviting me to the panel, and thank you also to my co-panelists for your insightful interventions. This discussion is timely not only for this conference, but also in the broader academic context, as it reaffirms the significant presence of disability studies scholars from and of Eastern Europe, including those with disabilities, those with lived experience of disability, and those who explicitly identify as allies of people with disabilities. And these scholars, meaning all of us here, try to uphold the ethos of disability studies by being, first of all, accountable to disabled people, as well as challenging ableism from an intersectional perspective. So for me, this moment, and for my other fellow disabled activists, this moment and this realization is both moving and empowering, as it signals that the days of primarily being left to our own devices in activist circles are finally over. And with this new chapter, new questions arise, which I look forward to discussing throughout the conference and beyond. Questions such as, what's next for us? What does the future hold? Or rather, as the title of the panel suggests, how do we imagine futures of disability studies? What steps are we currently taking? And what steps do we want to take to shape not only disability studies as an intellectual field, but also as a field understood as a meeting point or a meeting place for researchers and researcher advocates? Even if this meeting point and meeting place is decentralized institutionally, how can we bind it discursively and practice-wise in a way that is accessible and allows for multiplicity of perspectives, experimentations, as Kateřina said, and yet some accountability to each other as well? How can we remain open to receiving and offering constructive critique without fearing group or work-related negative consequences, especially in neoliberal global academic systems where competition, as Kamila already mentioned, is constantly increasing? In addition, envisioning futures for disability studies should encompass not only the academic context and intra and cross-disciplinary interactions, but also relationships with other public and private sector stakeholders, some of whom, as we all know, incorporate disability, yet often problematically, and others still overlook it. So for the purpose of this quick thought experiment, let's examine certain sectors linked to the prevailing yet harmful models of disability, the medical model and the charity model of disability. And the question is, how can we, as researchers, contribute to broadening, as one of my respondents phrased it, the circles of allies, for instance, among health professionals, without falling into the trap of the medical model? Or how can necessary assistance be provided, for example, to a refugee with a disability fleeing the Russian war in Ukraine or other wars, such as through the Belarusian-Polish border, by humanitarian aid workers without replicating practices shaped by the charity model of disability? In my cross-sectoral work with representatives from people from those sectors, I gathered that many of them want to be allies of people with disabilities. However, many of them shared with me that they don't know how to do it. They lack the in-depth understanding of what changes should be made and how, due to the long-standing self-limiting and detrimental disability models which are embedded in the systems they work in and for. This is why disability studies can contribute to, as a bridge between medical, humanitarian, and social work practices, incorporating anti-ableist approaches and implementing the parameters of the CRPD, while also considering the Eastern European context that we are trying to unpack throughout the conference. So while there's often discussion about how the medical and charitable models perpetuate discriminatory status quos, it seems that disability studies scholars could collaborate more closely with representatives from sectors polluted by ableist models of disability to explore, alternatives at the policy practice and even procedural levels if necessary. This would involve rethinking and envisioning disability futures together, rather than solely, for instance, sharing ready-made recommendations, which of course can bring some change. I remember one instance when a doctor I talked to during one of my research projects started our conversation quite reserved. He believed it was utopian to expect a doctor to provide needed help without adhering to certain protocols he was taught. He was adamant that the medical model of disability ensures the quality of treatment. However, he began to change his mind when he was introduced to a perspective developed by disabled activists that address the pressing medical needs of disabled women. His access to insightful first-hand, lived theorization of aspects he previously interpreted solely through the prism of the medical model of disability seemed to make a difference. There was some kind of human-to-human interaction that occurred despite the systemic traps that tend to create unequal power dynamics within the doctor-patient relationship and which, as we know, render the knowledge production of disabled people less valuable in medical settings. And lastly, while the humanitarian sector frames people with disabilities as one of the most vulnerable populations in humanitarian crises, unfortunately, this very group tends to fall through the cracks of humanitarian safety nets the most. This was evident in the case of evacuation of people with disabilities from Ukraine, as a significant number of them, as Darja already said, were left behind. And to help to fill this gap, what I refer to as DIY evacuations, that is do-it-yourself evacuations, conducted by disabled people and our allies, had to occur to save lives. Researching these instances and then contemplating new humanitarian paradigms where procedures are not only accessible, but also which recognize disabled people as expert in evacuation design, also belongs, in my view, to disability studies futures. Futures that are long overdue. Thank you.
Thank you for your deeply insightful interventions. We have 15 minutes, and we would like to open the floor to the audience, and we would like to hear your comments, questions to the panelists. So I will bring the mic. However, Oh, now we can see you. So yeah, are there any questions, comments, things you would like to address? Oh, okay, sorry. Go ahead, and then you can.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for this panel. Actually, I want to thank Darja that you mentioned Russian-Ukrainian war and how people with disabilities face with problems during the war. Actually, I'm working the same topic as you, and I absolutely agree with your points. But also, I can add one more point. Is it very important, in my point of view? It's a role of grounded organization of people with disabilities. Their role during the full-scale invasion really prominent, and they pay really a big attention to evacuation of people with disabilities. And after the second and the half year of the full-scale invasion, they practically work with people near the front line and also close to occupied territories. And it's very important to work to empowerment this local organization. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for this point. I think it goes really well with the thinking of Kateřina and Magda. And yes, there are many points. It's an open-ended discussion that we can go on. And I didn't emphasize enough how important it is that disability-led organizations are asked and they work hand in hand, and because we will always hear we are not equipped, we don't know, we have no knowledge and things like that. And as I said, there are research from other war situations that show that without the practice wisdom of disabled people themselves, people would receive even less support than if. So instead of focusing all the time on the needy and the war veteran and things like that, I mean, within the disability studies, we have to reconfigure and reshuffle the thinking and push to see that disabled people are those who can actually educate and tell and have the leading role in exceptional and situation of disasters, crisis, wars, armed conflicts. So thank you for this point.
Thank you so much. Yeah, should I go ahead? Okay, thank you so much. My name is Gili. I'm an anthropology professor from the Hebrew University. So I felt that I want to acknowledge, because the Palestinian Israel, the place that many of me and my Palestinian colleagues call home, came up a lot. So I just wanted to say, and it's difficult for me to put myself on the spot, but I felt that I want to acknowledge the importance of what you said and how crucial it is to use the disability studies knowledge that we have in East, I call it the Global East, East Europe, the Middle East, East Asia, with my colleagues from there also. We have a special Global East knowledge, and specifically from disability studies. And everything that you said to push against, I don't know, pre-given way of thinking, to use the knowledge from local people on ground. I can say just for myself, in my university, we work, a third of the students and colleagues are Palestinians from the West Bank or East Jerusalem. We work together to create better disability studies network in many, many areas of Israel, Palestine. And it's so important to remember the local knowledge and to use the knowledge we have as disability studies scholars in Eastern context in this political activism. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. Two words that have come to my mind when I was listening to your insightful presentations, and thanks for delivering all of these, are community and resilience. It seems to me that our situation in the academia and in the society is that of a person who decided to jump from the 10th floor, and when asked how they are doing when they are at the level of the 3rd floor, is saying, so far, so good. So it only can get you so far. I mean, if everything goes regular, to put it this way, things will work. But once we have crises, and as Magda has enumerated all these crises that afflict us, it all starts to fall apart. And we can see, for example, that this institutionalized model is simply, falling apart. It's just one brick, you take it out, and there is nothing. So that's why I think that these old ways of conceiving and working and looking at disability are not resilient, and as long as we do not take it seriously to make our work more community-based, us being more of a community which is supporting each other, and here I'm making links to some of the presentations that we've heard, then we will not have this resilience. And I'm glad that this conference is taking place, because we very often travel, work, teach, and do things in the academia, and it's so exhausting. I mean, I'm sure many of you feel this the same way. And as long as we do not have the community that says, yes, you're doing fine, you're doing a great job, and how can I help you, then it doesn't make any sense, to be honest, to be working at all. So thank you for all your contributions, and I don't know if anyone wants to address this point, but I just leave it there for all of us.
Okay. Hi, morning to everyone. I'm Radoš, a disability researcher from Serbia, and I have a question maybe for all panelists, and you can choose who wants to address it. I was wondering, how would you propose to address a disconnect between disability studies and disability movement in our countries and humanitarian actors, for example, in terms of how these actors define disability? Because if you look at the definitions by UNICEF or Save the Children or other actors active in the region, it's very much oriented towards individual model of disability. And also when it comes to disability movement, it seems that the movement is quite often lacking ideological foundations that drive their actions in terms of understanding what really social model of disability is, let alone some other approaches to disability and theoretical foundations. So yeah, I'm wondering how to adequately address this gap.
I can just quickly say about Poland. In Poland, in a way, we're lucky because, in a way, the emerging disability studies field, from the very beginning, and it's the past couple of years, has been done together with researchers and activists. A lot of researchers have disabilities, and a lot of researchers who don't have disabilities, they have been explicitly stated that they are allies of this group. So in a way, the Polish case study is interesting because the way we did it, we started even with major publications, we actually did it together. And a lot of NGOs or informal collectives of disabled people have been shaping the way we do research, what we research, etc. So this is the recent Polish case study, I would say.
I have only sort of several thoughts that are not necessarily connected into a coherent argument. So we have said stagnation, lag a couple times already in the discussion. And so I sort of want to push against that a little bit because what is the measure of the lag or the stagnation to where we are looking for comparison? And also Eastern Europe, when we are looking in Eastern Central Europe and we are trying to locate historicized disability studies, we tend to have a very clear starting point, 1989, 1991. We might push that because if organizational activism is very messy, but we do, and it has messy histories, but we do find it in various forms before that. So, and then perhaps we don't need that framework of lag or stagnation. But the issue that you have addressed, the really complex and complicated and very often impossible communication across layers is really important. But also, and I do feel that as academics, as scholars, we have like high responsibility to push these institutions, like especially the transnational institutions that are translating and holding up and reinforcing very specific understanding and translation of disability as a category of lag and pathology. But looking at the movement, I also feel there's, like, speaking from the position of Czech Republic and Czechoslovakia previously, things are happening and things are brewing, and it's really unoverseeable now. There's a lot of conflict in the also in the movement sphere, but also there are new forms of disability, queer, neurodivergence movement that are not necessarily, they are really up to date with the theoretical language and actually read up on the newest CRIP theory. So I think in some sense it's not necessarily the theoretical frameworks that are the issue, but rather how we can, like, recently we did a sort of a cultural project, a podcast, and what the topic that has been coming from the activists and people, disabled people active in and sort of trying to politicize disability was the fact that there is not a space, there is not a framework that would hold the different body of disabled people and the difference and diverge experiences. We are institutionally, structurally kept apart. So I think perhaps one of the other issues that I see that to me is more now, right now, is how we actually engage in the conversation that would bring us together, that would not differentiate the sort of activism of people with mobilities, with like people that have different forms of vision, or this is what is sort of like, this is the level that you talk to, how the institutional understanding of disability is in fact also structuring disability activism, and therefore reinforcing the structures of ableism in a way that people don't talk across and feel like we need to fight for the resources and we have different issues. And so this is also something that I wanted to throw out. Thank you.
Rancière said once that political movements have been most successful in the areas where the state were not present. So in at least in Slovenia and former Yugoslavia, and once we lived in the same country, the invalid organizations were very powerful. So there was almost no space for disability activism. Very, very little. Because when it came to the question about political representation, who were those who saw themselves entitled to represent disabled people? The invalid the nomenclatura of post-socialist invalid organization people. And it's up to now the same. And no doubt that, for example, personal assistance in Slovenia was fought by and actually achieved only because of disability activist organizations. But over the years, over the last couple of years, the whole idea of independent living, which was embedded even in the legislation, and it was a fantastic legislation. We are so proud of. We said, okay, finally we became the second Switzerland. So this is a local joke, because in 1991 the Slovenian politicians said Slovenia will become the second Switzerland, and of course we see where we are now. But what I want to say is that the whole idea that got re-domesticated, re-traditionalized, and is now moved into a kind of old-fashioned model of care instead of personal assistance. So yes, it's vital importance to have the movement, but there is not much space. I just want to have a sentence to the colleague who spoke previously. I wrote down your sentence: when institutional model is falling apart, what we have then. I think it's a very important sentence. Thank you. Kamila?
Kamila, do you want to make any intervention still?
I think that in Poland we have now more and more organizations which focus on, for example, convention on the rights of persons with disabilities and independent living movement, and this is very important. However, our tendency to associate is very weak. I think that it is a lot of to do, and this activism is also very individualistic, like doing research in academia. I think so. And on the other side, I noticed, for example, that it's very weak, this feminist disability study intervention in our organizations. This year we had this meeting of women with disabilities, and I didn't notice any influence of feminist disability studies there, or feminist at all. I agree with what Kateřina said about that every group of persons is fighting about resources, and yes, and I think that's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Unfortunately, we have to end now. Thank you all. We are told the end. We just see the note over there. So I'm really sorry. But I hope this is an opening of a conversation. And I know we touched upon many important topics, and I hope you will get a chance to, discuss all of it during the breaks and during the next 2-3 days. So thank you all for being with us today.